Hey, we didn't do a cold open last week.
We broke procedure. We violated protocol.
Does that mean we owe them 2 this week?
Oh, I don't know. How do we do 2 cold opens back to back? Wouldn't they just be?
Well, one would be warmer than the other, I think.
Damn it. This is definitely this podcast when both of our brains immediately went to like, well, the friction of speaking for more than 3 minutes would probably warm the temperature of the opening enough. So there's a cold open and a lukewarm opening.
So I'm sure you've talked about, there's a lot of weird stuff happening right now in the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's like Reddit is destroying hedge funds, but maybe not. And now there's some financial chicanery happening. Like, that whole thing seemed a little bit illegal to me, but then when people explained to me how hedge funds worked, I was like, oh, that should be illegal too. So
legality largely, as it seems, is defined by what you can get away with.
Yeah, the old wink and nod carries you a long way if you have a few $1 billion in the bank, it turns out.
Yep.
I was watching late night TV last night live, which I never do, and I saw ads on TV for the first time in years.
Okay.
Like as seen on TV, like so here's a thought. You can buy ads on like CNN late at night for like $200.
What?
Like they're really cheap.
Broadcast cable CNN, not like the CNN digital live stream, which gets different ads, like actual television CNN.
You can put it in a place that your mom and dad will see it. Yes.
But late at night, my mom and dad are.
Oh, look, you got to tell them they're going to have to set an alarm or something. Okay.
Sure. They'll TiVo it.
But so I saw an ad and I was like, there's this stuff called alien tape and it sounds incredible. It's like, you can use it over and over again. It sticks to almost anything. What? It's like foamy tape. And they were like, you can rinse it. They said you can rinse it off and reuse it. And I was like, wait a second. This isn't alien tape. This is nano bubble tape.
Just about to say.
Like, we're ahead of the game. All these people are doing is buying nano tape. They're sticking a kind of half-assed logo on it in a box. And then they're selling it for like 4 prices plus shipping and handling. And Brad, I'm not a business guy. Well, I mean, I am a business guy, but I'm bad at it. It seems like they're covering the entire cost of the product in the shipping and handling fee.
I would believe that. You left out the part where they gave it a more exotic sounding name. Very important.
Nano is exotic as hell.
Yeah, but it doesn't play to the late night cable news audience, let's say.
I mean, I think
there's a what factor to the word nano where the word alien is like, oh man, did they smuggle this tape out of Area 51? What?
I mean, that is the strong implication that they made in this advertisement. I did not buy it, but I did post the as seen on TV tape ad in the Discord, so everyone can enjoy it. All they do in these late night ads, I think. Okay, so there's 2 things here. One is I think we need to make a late night TV ad. I got to figure out how much it actually costs rather than just like eyeballing and thinking this can't cost more than a few $100s or else nobody would do this. But we need to make a late night TV ad, I think, for the podcast.
Oh boy.
And all you have to do is say the name of the podcast like 25 times in a 30-second ad.
Okay. Should we put the word alien in there somewhere?
I mean, look, like if we wanted to sexy up the podcast for boomers, how would we do? Like,
oh man,
would it be like Tech Corner, Technotronics?
It's Brad and Will made a hot rod.
Yeah,
that's things that boomers love.
Your son-in-law, the podcast.
There you go. Fortunes have been made on less.
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad. Virtually.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a teaser.
That's right.
Is this the second cold open, or we're going to do? I mean, I really do feel like we owe them. Maybe we do an Oops All Cold Opens episode 1 week.
We should totally. Oh, that's kind of that idea we talked about. Did we talk about it on the show or just on the Discord of like a rapid fire 3-minute topic back to back to back to back to back to back episode? Yeah, it's just like, how much can we talk about this topic? Let's get stopwatches. Let's get egg timers and see how much we can cover in 3 minutes per topic.
Oh, I like that. It seems like all the research of a normal episode with
times 20.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Well, what if we did no research? What if we came up with a list of topics and showed up and said, here's what we know about these off the head?
I've often thought the Whiskey Media panel of experts was ahead of its time. So,
I mean, God, this might be an entire podcast idea.
So I've been thinking about doing like a late night call-in show because I've been having trouble sleeping lately.
I bet there's a market for that, especially these days.
Yeah, and I feel like I like talking to people, but not in person. And if I can hang up on them, that's better for me.
Sure.
So
yes. Conversations with an exit clause.
Yeah,
always the best.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe I'll try that this week. I got nothing else going on.
That's right. Except this podcast.
This podcast, we're talking about something that's close to me.
Yeah.
Personal.
Yes, it is something you've been living.
For a while, I was the public face of.
That's right.
Briefly.
That's right. You were the icon of virtual reality.
Yeah, I was the number one Google result for VR guy.
Who owns that photo? Who took
Norm.
that? Is that
it's a Norm? It's
Does Norm own it, or does his parent? I mean, does his employer own it? I don't know how does that work for employees of companies that take pictures? Did the photographers own the pictures, or did the employers?
I don't know. My contract didn't they didn't sign me to a creator contract when we started working for that company out of Whiskey, and Norm used his own camera to take that picture, but it was on site during a shoot at Tested. So that's a question for the law. I mean, look. The opportunity to make money on that picture is long gone now. So
missed your window.
It's a moot point. But I don't know. I think Norm probably owns that unless his contract specifies otherwise, unless he signed a different contract than me. Anyway, like there was a moment when I left Tested where I was like, they never made me sign a work for hire. Like they don't actually, I didn't assign copyright to the work that I did for Tested during that time. Usually when you're an editor, they gave me just a normal employee contract because they were bad at hiring editors when they hired us. And I was like, I actually own everything that I've ever posted on Tested still. Like, I'm not going to do anything with it, but yeah. Anyway, I mean, but that's as it should be. Like if you're a writer, you should own your work and you should license it out to the people who are using it. And then you should make a book or something. I don't know. We're talking about VR today.
Yeah. I don't know. Apropos of nothing, I think we were spitballing topics a couple weeks ago, and this just kind of came up.
Well, so every end of every year I'm on a nominations committee that kind of goes through all the big VR releases and makes the short list for a large games award thing. And I just finished up that. So it's a good time to talk about state of the, I know what's going on. I know what last year looked like pretty
right. That's kind of how I envisioned this, is that it's just sort of a state of the virtual union. Because I feel like, I don't know. I don't want to be too pessimistic, but it feels like things are at a lull for VR to me.
Well, it's a weird, there's a bunch of stuff happening and some of it is good, but so the biggest thing that happened last year for VR is probably that Alex came out and the Quest 2 was launched.
Okay.
The Quest is Oculus's mobile hardware standalone VR headset.
Yeah.
You can also buy a special cable for $80 and plug it into your PC.
Yes. But I'm told you can also use it wirelessly, although it takes some doing.
So you can use it wirelessly there's a couple of ways to do that. The one that I think most people use is, I think, virtual desktop. I haven't used that with a Quest 2. With a Quest 1, it was surprisingly good.
Yeah. But you have to sideload stuff onto the headset and so forth.
So sideloading on the Quest 1 was really easy. You just hit the install dev stuff button and then copy an APK over to it. And then there's a whole sideload store that you can put on, and it makes it super easy to grab new software. The other thing that happened is Alex came out for the PC on Steam, and it's the first I mean, it's really the first like big AAA high fidelity, like 20 hour game that I've played that was actually worth spending 15 or 20 hours on. And it remains, I mean, we talked about it a lot last year, but it remains pretty remarkable, I think. And I would expect it to be the high water mark for VR for a while. Both in terms of like the sheer volume of art in that game is incredible. Like the number of things, there are thousands of things you can pick up on every single level. And that sounds like a dopey metric, except for when you're in VR and you're doing stuff, you kind of like, it's much more important that you're able to interact with objects in the world because it makes the world feel much more real than if you can't.
That is the selling point of VR to me.
In a lot of cases, yeah.
Not so much being in the environment as being able to touch and manipulate the environment. Like that's what I want. Like if you can make the nicest looking game ever, but if everything is static and you can't actually touch and move things around and use them in like a physical way, then what's the point?
Yeah. I mean, the whole point of it is it opens up the available verbs to the player.
Totally.
And like just the sheer act of being able to chuck something and distract a bad guy with it, or bring a goofy marker and write on windows later on in the game or whatever. Like that stuff is really cool. The rest of the stuff that we saw, so there were a handful of real standout experiences in games that I saw in the nomination phase stuff. The Museum of Other Realities, if you haven't tried, is a thing that Colin Northway and his team built.
What was that? God.
Fantastic Contraption.
Yes, that game was great.
Yeah,
I love that game.
So Colin is one of the people. He's been working on VR since before it was before people knew that the Vive was a thing. He was working on Fantastic Contraption, and he has a really good understanding of both movement and space in virtual spaces. So the MOR is an art museum for art that only can exist in VR. Folks like Danny Bittman created sculptures and drawings and things using everything from like tilt brush to Maya. And there's probably dozens. I don't think there's quite 100, but there's a lot of the whole thing is set up like an actual art museum. So you like load into the lobby. It tells you how to navigate. You can switch between walking and flying and teleporting. And there's also a mini map, like a model of the art museum that you can click into to fast travel to any particular exhibit. And the exhibits are these incredible, like some of them are just things you look at. Some of them you can shrink down and stand inside, so you can like experience what it looks like as a human scale sculpture, and then as something that you inhabit. Some of them are interactive, so some of them like you'll put your head in a spot and follow a line with your head, and you'll hear a story told as you move your head through the sculpture, or it'll make music based on your head position and stuff like that. And they're, and then some of them are more dynamic. Like you'll be in a 0G space where you can kind of float around and there's stuff moving around you and sounds playing when the objects move around you. And it's the thing that struck me about that more than anything else is I didn't realize it, but I really miss going to museums and just like, I wish I could just sit down with a book on one of the benches in this museum and read a book. But it's also multiplayer. So like you can be in there and be walking around with other people and they'll be exploring the art and you can talk to them the whole thing if you want.
Is this on Steam? I have to check this out. I loved Fantastic Contraption. I'm pretty sure I met him and his wife. I think they both worked together on this stuff.
Sarah makes
at a con like years ago, and they were super nice.
Sarah makes she used to make a Flash zombie survival game, like a isometric. I think it's called Rebuild. And there's the latest ones have been on the iPad and I think do pretty well for her. Okay. So they're really, I enjoy them. I think as a zombie, like they're kind of like strategy, part strategy. They're not like a tactical game like XCOM, but you kind of explore the town and rebuild areas and retake territory and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's like a light strategy game.
I feel like Alex notwithstanding, like that is still the kind of bread and butter of VR, or like the stuff that is interesting or matters, like these kind of museum, like figuratively museum pieces. I know that's an actual museum, but like these kind of, like self-contained little novel, like weird gimmicky things, not so much like, they're not a lot of like sprawling 60-hour like epic RPGs in VR out there. You know what I mean?
I think gimmicky is unfair.
Oh, well, I don't mean. I guess the word gimmick sounds a little pejorative, and I don't mean it to. I mean more like they've got a hook, like they've got a novel hook to them.
Yeah, it's like the stuff that conceptually, the things that I end up spending the most time with are probably arcade games because I like to play the leaderboard game. You know, I like to see if I can beat my friend's score in Space Pirate Trainer or better my score in Pistol Whip or Beat Saber or something. Yeah, like I
mean, those are like high score, like action-y kind of experiences. But even then, they do like one thing very well, right? Like they're not. What I mean is like you're not. Yes, they do. I'm kind of undermining my own argument here. Like yes, they did put out Skyrim and Fallout 4 in VR, but like they're not making new games like that for VR. You know what I mean?
That's it.
Like to me, like obviously none of those games were failures. Like I just looked at, according to Steam Spy, which I guess is pretty fuzzy data, but like they estimate that somewhere between 2 and 5 million people own Half-Life Alyx. And I think those Bethesda VR games have done quite well, but like they haven't set the world on fire. You know what I mean? Like they didn't make tens of millions of people go out and buy VR headsets. So
well, so I haven't checked into Fallout 4 or Skyrim lately. I played them around launch, and both of them had comfort issues to the point that I didn't want to play them. Like I wouldn't have. If you had said, "Hey, could you spend 100 hours in a VR version of Fallout 3?" I think I would have said unequivocally yes. And then when I actually tried it, I was like, "This is not what I want." Because like those are games that I usually load up a podcast or something or have a movie on a second screen while I'm playing because they're kind of like, I don't know. They're often like chore simulators, right? It's like get a task, go out into the wasteland someplace, shoot something, bring back a piece of liver, and then, build another wall on your thing. The thing that I'm finding, ports of 2D games notwithstanding, is that the VR versions of like one of the things that happened the last year or so is that we've seen a lot of clones of games genres that have large followings on the 2D side, on normal traditional gaming. So there's a Battle Royale, there's an Arma clone, there's a CSGO clone.
Okay, when you just to clarify, when you say 2D, you're talking about like rasterized to a screen, not like a side scroller.
Yeah, I mean
not a sprite based like bitmapped thing.
I mean something 3D, you play on a screen, 3D not something games you play in a headset.
Right. Because those translate into VR to some extent because they are 3D.
They can, but because for anything where your camera movement is integral to the way the game works, which is basically like any first person shooter, you can't. It's hard to port that stuff over without making people either really uncomfortable or completely rewriting the way the game works, as happened with like Skyrim and Teleport and stuff like that.
Yeah, can I just quote from the notes here?
Yeah,
something that you wrote. Developers seem to be saying F comfort. I felt sick testing the games this year for the first time in ages, and that is shocking to me.
Yeah,
like I'm kind of with you. I mean, I'm not as shocked as you maybe because like it's just a basic physiological issue, right?
Well, but so it's weird because I don't usually get motion sick, so that indicates to me that the level of willingness to make people uncomfortable has gone way up.
Well, so hang on. Do you mean you don't get motion sick
ever
traditionally, or you don't get motion sick in VR to date?
I've played Temple Run in the back of a moving car before, which Temple Run is a thing that makes most people feel sick, like while they're just sitting still.
Is that VR?
VR, yeah. There's a VR version of Temple Run.
That's what I'm trying to establish. You're saying that you have an iron stomach. You have a VR iron stomach, right?
Yeah. Like Brad, I played almost all of Alien Isolation in an Oculus DK2.
Oh God, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like I don't get sick. So the fact that I'm starting to feel twinges of motion sickness playing mostly Quest games, a couple of PSVR games.
That's what I wanted to establish because I have never gotten motion sick at all outside of VR, like moving cars, games, whatever, reading in motion, whatever. But pretty much from day one, any VR game that you walk smoothly around in and use like smooth turning, like kind of standard first person movement, like from day one, like just sweats, hot, kind of that hot feeling, the queasy, just ugh.
So one of the things that's happened over the last few years is it has become clear that you can become accustomed to that.
Really?
That you can, like, more exposure to it makes it less bad for most people.
Oh, it's so unpleasant that I don't think I could expose myself to it for extended periods.
Yeah, you have to be kind of a masochist or really excited about VR to do that. I played Alyx. I played like a third of Alyx with teleport on, and then I switched to the smooth movement, and I was a little bit less comfortable, but I never got to the point that I like had the cold chills and the stomach gurgles and all that stuff. And eventually it was fine. On the lower frame rate platforms like the Quest and the PSVR, that is a different experience. Now, at the same time, there were games that used novel locomotion, like the Iron Man game on PSVR, which actually didn't make me feel bad. I was kind of surprised because, like, with that, you're literally flying like Iron Man, putting your hands behind you to go forward and stuff like that. There's a Phantom Covert Ops is a game on the Oculus on the Quest, I think.
Tactical kayak game.
Tactical kayak game. It's basically, what was the thing from Simpsons? Night Boat. It's like Knight Rider, but it's a car, it's a boat. So the bad guys always have to be next to a canal.
Of course.
It's the same thing. That game, that made me feel sick after like an hour. Oof. Like the Mist VR port, when you turned on smooth motion, which I think it defaulted to, made me feel sick really quickly. Like there's a lot of games that I was shocked made me feel bad. Like I would have been happy if Mist was just 360 bubbles of the original Mist layouts and not be like, I didn't need to have a real-time movement through the Mist Island and have it look like a kind of crappy PS2 game.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's like the motion stuff is all over the place. The other thing is, when people do these ports of the existing genres, in order to make those games accessible to the broader audience, like a small VR audience that has wider interests than, say, CSGO or PUBG or Apex or Arma has on the PC, they have to dilute the mechanics that make those genres interesting and the mechanical complexity that makes those games interesting on the PC. So, for example, I play a lot of battle royales. In Generation Zero, which is the VR battle royale, you have 16 players in a match. The guns, like, there's no recoil really, because you can't make the player lift their hands up when you're shooting and have recoil. Like the position of the gun has to align, so they have accuracy cones instead of that. So all you do is feather your shots, and like the first shot lands exactly where you want it. But there's no because there's so few players, the maps aren't big enough to have long range encounters and stuff like that. It all ends up being like close up fighting with high speed automatic weapons or shotguns. And it's just not, it doesn't have the same kind of cognitive load that playing a game like Apex or PUBG or Warzone or Fortnite has.
Not the same depth.
Yeah. Is that
Population 1 is the name of that game?
Did I say Generation 1? Yeah, it's Population 1. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to make sure.
It's like, imagine if you were playing Dota, but you took out like 50% or 70% of the mechanical complexity of that game.
That's a bad example, because that might make me like not hate Dota so much. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, that even sounds true of like that Do Medal of Honor game, which just came out last month, right? It's pretty new still.
It's December, I think.
I had not played it. I thought it was Oculus only because Oculus funded it, but you just let me know that it's on Steam as well, which is that in itself is a surprise. But the bigger surprise to me was that you said you were not very fond of it.
Well, so the cross-platform Oculus funded stuff developed internally by Oculus doesn't come out on Steam. Stuff developed externally seems to.
That's the distinction. Okay.
Yeah, just because the market, especially since Oculus seems to be focusing on mobile, on Quest over PC VR. I think like if they had released that game and not put it on Steam, it would have sold like 15 copies, and they would have spent a whole buttload of money on something that like 8 people played.
That's fair.
But it's really weird. So, like a normal Medal of Honor game or Call of Duty game, you kind of like, you start the game, you do the tutorial thing, and then you land, you have a landing, you have some sort of big showcase set piece sequence, and then you traverse, like doing combat the entire time you're traversing, and then there's another set piece. This game seems to kind of just be set pieces, or maybe like small combat arenas.
That's unfortunate.
Like you do the tutorial thing, which takes a really long time, and then you have to do this stealth encounter, and then you have to break into a building and find some guys, and like it's just the checkpoints were really rough in that, like you would do half of the murders that you need to in this area, but it wouldn't checkpoint at any point along the way. So if you failed, which happened all the time, you'd have to go do the whole thing over again. And at the same time, your AI helpers are incredibly proficient murderers. So if you just kind of hang out behind a rock for a couple of minutes, you just have to kill maybe 2 people and you're good. It's just, I don't know. It just was
Very
kind
thin.
of overwhelming.
Yeah.
Underwhelming rather.
That's unfortunate. I mean, because it's Respawn and it's a it is a big storied franchise. I kind of had some high hopes that it might be up there with Alex as like one of the more ambitious things, but it sounds like maybe not.
Look, if that game had come out last December before Alex shipped, probably I would have had a different feeling about it. But since Alex gave you that continuous, like in Alex, you move from one section to the next. The end of one area is the start of the next area. There's no, there's no like time skips or jumps or anything like that.
It's a world.
It feels like a real world. And this feels like a series of it reminds me of, I can't remember which of, no, Siri, go away.
Siri has thoughts on VR.
It reminds me of one of those early, I think it was a Medal of Honor that you just kind of jumped from battle to battle, and you're not really like, it didn't feel like a continuous, it was before they realized that they should give you multiple player perspectives.
Yeah.
But after they did like one giant long first person shooter campaign.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah. So the state of games is maybe a little bit underwhelming, like you said, a bit muted at the moment.
There's a bunch of weird, cool, small stuff. And then there's a bunch of expensive, like great to mediocre to actively bad. Like the expensive games are all over the place, I guess, is the big takeaway.
Yeah. I mean, I am coming out of this with a few things I want to. I really want to check out the Museum of Other Realities.
Paper Beast is really cool.
Paper Beast has been on my list. I've been meaning to check that out for a while. That's Eric Chahi, isn't it? I believe.
Yeah, and the neat thing about that is everything's done in shaders, I think.
Oh wow!
Like it's a technical marvel.
Is it? What is it? I really need to play that.
It's
like it like it almost looks like a horrifying nightmarish version of Viva Pinata or something. Is it kind of an ecology simulator like it looks?
It is. There's a little bit of that. It's like in terms of mechanics and what you do, it's probably closer to something like Journey.
Okay.
Like you're just kind of traversing this world. There's some light puzzles along the way.
Okay.
There's all sorts of weird creatures. Sometimes the creatures are involved in the puzzles. It's just it's really neat and really pretty.
Is there terrain deformation in this?
There is all sorts of terrain deformation.
I have got to play this then because he did From Dust, right? We're getting off
that seems right
here, but I just want to make sure I've got that right. Yes, I loved From Dust. I feel like people did not.
What? I don't know if I remember From Dust.
It's kind of. I started to say it's sort of like a modern day Populous, but that's not really right because it's not as much about like building a population and like goosing population numbers and stuff like that. It's more about terrain based puzzle solving. But it's very much like you're a god and it has enough sort of physics simulation to it that like you can like scoop out this earth to let the water flow through to turn this lava into rock so that people can cross the rock. And like, it's a very, very much like a terrain deformation based puzzle game that I thought was super cool.
It's a little bit of like black and whitey stuff.
So kind of. Yeah. So it's sort of in that realm. So yeah, if Paper Beast has any of that in it, I really need to play that.
I was gonna say the other big game that was kind of neat in a, like it felt, this is weird because there's an actual like Ace, like Project Wingman came out this year, which is a straight up like Ace Combat, like spiritual successor. But that Iron Man game for PSVR feels very much like an Ace Combat, like an old Ace Combat, even in that it's kind of janky. Like you're aiming and stuff. You end up doing ridiculous stuff in your living room. The entire family really enjoyed watching. They thought it was really funny. But yeah, it's like in reality. So there's two places that things are really going well, I would say. One is cockpit games. So racing, car racing, flight sims, Squadrons.
Yes. Alex and Star Wars Squadrons are the two things that really got me into a VR headset last year.
Yeah, Squadrons, once they fixed the initial launch problems that they had with VR and high refresh rate monitors and stuff like that, Squadrons is amazing.
It's like quite good in VR. Like it really hits that wish fulfillment aspect of like, I want to sit in an X-Wing and like, now I feel like I am.
Well, and they actually did a good job. Like Respawn. No, that's not Respawn, is it?
No,
that's
no. It was it out of Montreal studio?
Yeah.
I forget which one of the EA was it. Motive? I forget.
Motive is who did that, I believe. They did a really good job with like the UI stuff that like the Project Wingman is a good example of like how not to do ports, because they have like problems like Z fighting where the UI HUD elements that are in the 2D, flat screen version of the game are rendering over the cockpit in a way that's really weird and uncomfortable. Squadrons doesn't really have those problems. It does occasionally, but they're hard to avoid. The control stuff works really well. It works great with a gamepad. If you have a HOTAS, it's really cool. It is a phenomenal version of that game. Microsoft Flight Sim VR stuff I haven't tried yet. That's the one thing I haven't gotten into because I didn't have 300 gigs or whatever I need free on my SSD to play that, and it wasn't nominated.
Yeah. So yeah. Sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say racing. Then the other thing is like weird platformers. Is this game called hold on, where is it? Below the Rabbit Hole? Beneath?
I've heard of that.
Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm finding it in my notes.
Turns out whenever I lightly disparage VR in public, I hear from people who love VR with game recommendations, and that was one of them.
So it's imagine like a platformer / adventure game where you're going down, where the entirety of it takes place in a downward spiral around the hole that Alice falls down to get to Wonderland. And like they did it's a really good example of using art direction to mask the limitations of the mobile hardware in the Quest. So it's all like flat shaded polys. Okay. It's kind of lo-fi in a way that's really attractive. And they tell the story of Alice in Wonderland.
That sounds very cool, actually.
Yeah, but again, it's one of those situations where it's pretty light. Like if that game was a PC game or a console game, you would expect it to be more mechanically complex than it probably is, because it's mostly just like, tapping around, opening doors, grabbing stuff from the environment, stuff like that.
Yeah. So yeah, the game's situation is a bit up and down with VR right now. Like you've outlined some apps stuff here. I actually just happened to see, I guess it made enough news that it kind of got retweeted into my feed.
The tilt brush thing?
The tilt brush, Google's, what would you call it, kind of 3D paint application, I guess, has been discontinued and open sourced.
Yeah, so Patrick Hackett and a small team of people worked on that for a long time. They came over from Double Fine, or they started Tilt Brush and then got bought by Google. And they basically, when the team left, they were like, well, we're going to open source this, put it out there, and stop development on it.
Is that how it worked? The developers left and then they were like, all right, this is done.
Look, about 2 weeks ago, I saw Patrick tweeting that he was leaving Google to go do something else, but he couldn't say what it was yet. So yeah. It's funny. There's a lot of content creation tools out for VR, and most of them are priced in such a way that they're for professionals, people who are selling their work for money, because they're priced like Maya or something like, they're multiple hundreds of dollars a year or more.
Yeah.
Oculus had Medium, which they sold to Adobe. That's their kind of clay sculpting thing. And that's
I followed. I believe they had I'm sure he had plenty of other responsibilities, but on his feed it seemed like he was almost like a medium artist in residence kind of. I forget his name, but actually now that I think about it, I haven't seen him post anything in a while. But for a while he was posting like a sculpture a day.
Yeah, on
his Twitter feed from Medium. It seemed like they were behind that and it was cool. Like there was some really nice looking stuff coming out of there.
Well, yeah, Medium was really neat because it was like blobby. It was like sculpting with clay, right? It was like clay, but you have an undo button and you can scale things and also do all it's like Photoshop but for clay. That was the pitch for Medium. It was really neat. They sold it to Adobe. Adobe, it's an Oculus native app, so that means it's only on Oculus PC headsets. And it's unclear what Adobe's doing with it. I hope that they're going to port it to Steam VR so that everybody can use it, but we'll see. This is one of the other things that's worth mentioning is it's hard to port because there's not a lot of control parity. I went to Valve in December of 2019 to play Alex on all the different headsets because they wanted outside feedback and they wanted to show, the work that they put into porting it into different controller schemes. And you have the original Vive ones, you have the grippy controllers that are limited fidelity, like grip on or a binary grip, basically. So like Oculus and the Windows MR controllers. And then you have the Index and controllers that give you like analog control of individual fingers. And making something as simple as throwing work on all of those different interfaces is challenging.
Yeah.
So like I get that why they haven't ported it to Steam VR. It's just that needs to happen if they want to continue using it. Google open source Tilt Brush. We'll see what happens with that. I don't know if there's enough of a community in the programmer world to make that continue to be a thing.
People seemed excited about it for what it's worth. Like people, again, like I don't know, who knows how many people. That might be 3 people, but I did see people saying like, this is huge for VR productivity. People will be able to extend this out in some wild ways now. I will say this really caught my attention because like Tilt Brush was probably top 3 like initial VR things I saw that was just like, well, this is magic. Because, you're literally painting in open space, you're literally just like slinging particles and this weird, like tangible, anti-gravity paint that just sort of hangs in the air. And then you can kind of move around in it and stuff. Like it was one of the first VR proof of concept things that I used that I was like, man, this is kind of amazing.
I mean, the demo, when I was showing people VR for the first time, I would always have them draw a cube in Tilt Brush, right? And usually they do the thing where they draw 2 squares and they do the diagonal lines. And then you get them to walk, like to circle that 90 degrees around the outside of their circle. Yeah. And they're like, oh, it's flat.
Yep. That's because you were trying to draw a cube on a 2D surface.
Exactly.
This ain't 2D anymore.
I mean, the neat thing is there's the really exciting thing is there's already they'd already built a bunch of exports so you can get Tilt Brush sketches into other workflows, like for display and stuff like Museum of Other Realities, or also to bring it in to like use that as your sketching environment for Maya and other like professional 3D tools. There's other stuff. Quill is like the animation. It's like Tilt Brush, but with more animation steps. So you can do like individual drawings and you can move them through time and space and then export those into other places as well. That's only on Oculus PC. It's another Oculus developed app. And, but there are viewers for that stuff on the Quest. Then there's a bunch of other things. There's Google has this cube. It's blocks, I think is what they call it. But it's like building things out of primitives. So if you want to build spaceships and stuff like that, it's pretty good for that. And then there's a bazillion startups, but I think realistically it's this space in particular is in a weird waiting for AR space. Cause I feel like that's where we're at. Like nobody really figured out, hey, here's what the UI should look like for this kind of app. Like there's no analog to the Photoshop tool, like that tool tray with all the stuff on the side.
I was going to say, it's not clear to me how many artists are actually out there using these things in their workflows for like non-VR applications. Like it kind of is reminiscent to me of that pie in the sky Magic Leap idea of like, well, we're never going to have monitors again because everybody will just sit at their desks with these AR glasses on. And it has not quite come to fruition.
So the people that I know, the artists that I know that I was working with, mostly would use it as a sketching type situation.
Like a concepting. So that sounds like a good application for that, actually. Not necessarily like production assets are going to come out of that, but more just like here's a quick way to like concept out some stuff to look at in 3D.
Well, there's no reason that production assets can't come out of that. But around launch, the headsets were a little bit low resolution, so it was hard to see exactly what you were doing. That's less of a problem now with the Index and the Reverb 2 and even the Oculus, the Rift S. But it's a thing. So for me, as somebody who's bad at using the 4-pane traditional CAD interface, the XYZ view and then the 3D preview, like my brain can't convert between what those 3 panes show and a 3D model unless it's straight edged, right? Or circles or something like that. So like being able to load up medium and sculpt clay, my brain, I can do that. So I feel like if you're already a 3D artist, probably you're not the kind of person that can't use those 4-pane CAD interfaces. So maybe the market for that stuff is limited. I don't know. The folks I know that use that stuff for production assets find it to be much faster and more effective. And it's also a lot easier to do stuff that was really complicated on 3D spaces, like voids inside things and stuff like that. Anyway,
Sure.
It's the other stuff. There's a bunch of demo stuff. Google Earth is still cool. All of that stuff is still out there, but it's slowed down a little bit. It seems
right. That's kind of the point of all of this to me is it's been a while since there was a Google Earth, like the kind of the big showpiece events in VR are not as frequent as they were.
I mean, we talked about this. We've talked about this off pod before, but it feels to me like at this point, if you're buying a VR headset, fitness stuff is really good. That's something you'll do every day.
That's something that's interested me, but the idea of sweating all over my several $100 very high tech piece of equipment is not appealing.
Most of them have foam, open or close cell foam face masks by default. You can get leather replacement ones that will make them less absorbent, which is probably good for the electronics. I've sweated in both my Vive Pro and my Index a lot and have had no problems, and my Quest. Even Oculus has even leaned into this and has a fitness app that uses Beat Saber mini games and Pistol Whip mini games to do leg and arm day. So if you put some wrist weights on, you can actually, you're not going to get huge, Dwayne Johnson muscles, but you'll burn calories.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then stuff like Box VR and there's a ton of fitness apps that are pretty good. There's dancing apps. There's all sorts of stuff. You want to talk about headsets?
Yeah, sure.
The state of the headset market.
Kind of a quick rundown of this stuff. I mean, a lot of it has been out there for a while, but yeah.
Yeah. So, I think starting with the old stuff, it seems like PSVR is basically dead.
Yeah, I threw that in here. When was that? I think it was just prior to the PS5 launch. Jim Ryan, the head of PlayStation, did an interview with the Washington Post where he just kind of threw cold water all over VR, or PlayStation VR in particular. They sold.
If you bought a PS5, you get a free dongle that makes it work with your PSVR, right?
You can use and they said that way before PS5 came out, that the original headset would be compatible, but the implication was, and there were even some patents going around that people dug up, that they were also working on a next gen PSVR for PS5. And maybe, probably. I mean, let me pull this.
That thing sold. It sold.
Well,
it was the best-selling VR headset for a long time.
That was in this Washington Post story that I'll just quote: while 5 million headsets were sold by January of this year, this was last year, I believe, sales were slowing in 2020. So 5 million. I mean, when I read that, 5 million sounds like a lot of VR headsets, although against the
80 million PS4s or something.
It's way more than that. The against the full. Let me see. I think they're way past 100 million. I'm seeing numbers 110, 112. Yeah, they passed 100 million in mid 2019. So,
oh wow,
if we're talking less than 5% of your user base has the headset, that's 5 million is a pretty big number, but it's not much it's kind of a drop in the bucket of the overall PlayStation audience. But
I mean, the unfortunate thing is that they were using what are essentially PS3 controllers that have a single point of data. Those controllers were always pretty good at tracking X and left and right and up and down. But if you had to move closer or further away from the camera, they're bad at that.
I mean, I'm not, I didn't work on the PlayStation VR. I could be wrong, but to me, it seemed like depending on that camera for the tracking was really the Achilles heel of the PSVR. It's never been stable for me. I've used most of the PC headsets at one time or another, and they generally all track like they're supposed to. Obviously setting up lighthouses is a pain in some cases, and Inside Out is what it is. But the tracking on the PSVR has always been by far the least reliable to me.
So for me, the headset always worked great, but the hands tend to fly off into space, which means they lose tracking.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it varies wildly based on your room. If I have big glass windows opposite the TV in my living room, and when the shades are up, then I can't use the PSVR in there because it sees 2 copies of the headset. Right. They're still releasing games. That Iron Man game came out this year. There's a couple other things that came out.
Well, Iron Man, will be a year old before we know it. It was May or something last year.
Oh, that's right.
Hitman 3 is probably the biggest recent example. It just came out and has a VR mode. But you have to download and granted, it's one purchase. You get the PS4 and 5 versions for the $160, but you if you have a PS5 and a PSVR, you literally have to download the PS4 SKU of Hitman 3 to play the VR version. Because if I read that interview correctly, you essentially can't make a PS5 PSVR game. Like, it has to be like I assume what they're saying is there's no API support for a native PS5 game to have VR in it. I could be wrong about that, but that's the implication, is that they basically said you can play PS4 VR games on a PS5, but there will not be PS5 VR games for anytime soon. And he basically said, I mean, the quote was, I should just pull it up. Is it
maybe we'll get back to that eventually?
I think we're more than a few minutes from the future of VR. PlayStation believes in VR, Sony believes in VR, and we definitely believe at some point in the future VR will represent a meaningful component of interactive entertainment. Will it be this year? No. Will it be next year? No. But will it come at some stage? We believe that.
So 2023.
So yeah, like they probably are working. They probably are working on another headset, but who knows when or if it will see the light of day.
Is this Sony Europe versus Sony US business? Is this like the normal?
Well, he runs everything now. Like, okay. I mean, yes, probably behind the scenes on some level, there is maybe some level of territoriality or power struggle or something. But like, yeah, he is the head of the whole thing now. So he is speaking for the company. So yeah, like this was a little bit of a shock to me, because I had always been under the impression that PSVR was kind of the most successful headset.
Well, the story they were telling in the first part of it probably is the most successful headset.
Yeah, by the numbers is what I mean.
In terms of numbers, but yeah. The story they were telling at the start of the year last year was, hey, we're going to keep supporting this thing. We're going to make it work with your PS5s. And there's going to be new stuff coming out. And then, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, with this weird, like, 1 foot in the last generation approach that they've got here, I would be shocked if there are a ton more PSVR games anytime soon.
Yeah, it's probably going to be stuff that's late. Right.
Beyond stuff that is has been in development for a while.
Well, okay, so the PC side is equally complicated. The second generation Vive, the Cosmos, is their inside out headset. And at least I haven't used it in more than a year, but when I used the inside out tracking version of that headset, it was almost unusable.
What?
The Cosmos.
What?
Yeah, it was bad.
How's that possible? There have been good inside out headsets on the market for like 3 years now.
Well, they did a bad job of it. It didn't work very well for me.
Wow.
It uses the old wand style controllers as well.
Huh.
Is that right? I can't remember.
It's probably
might actually not be right.
It's probably telling that when I looked over these notes and saw the phrase Vive Cosmos, I had no idea what it was. I know what the Valve Index is. I know what the Vive and the Vive Pro are.
So the thing about the Cosmos,
Quest 2, Rift S, Windows, I know all of those, but Vive Cosmos was like, what?
Well, so the thing about the Cosmos is you can buy faceplates for it that add functionality, like the hand tracking stuff and things like that.
Huh.
They actually sold a faceplate and sold it in a bundle eventually with the faceplate, where it just has the normal lighthouse sensors on the front, and that worked okay. Is it my understanding?
HTC. Is Vive an HTC brand?
Vive is an HTC brand.
It has nothing to do with, or not nothing to do with Valve, but it's not owned by Valve. It is HTC's property, right?
So yeah, Valve creates the technology and the lighthouses,
right?
And then HTC was using the sensors and was doing the rest themselves. For the lighthouse tracked versions.
Yeah.
For the inside out tracked versions, they were doing it all themselves.
Okay. And so the Index still uses the lighthouses as well. Is that correct?
The Index uses the lighthouses. It uses V2 lighthouses. That's
shocking to me. Like that. Did that come out? Like, time is such a blur, man. I swear to God. I mean, Alex is one of those games that came out right around the time that the pandemic started. So it's like impossible to think back on that sequence of events. But didn't the Index basically come out around the time of Alex? Like, wasn't it sort of timed to that launch, or no?
No. So the Index came out in 2019, but it was sold out constantly.
Right, that's what it was.
And they had a big dump of new SKUs that they released in time for Alex.
Okay, right. But it's just
new hardware. As much
as Valve has been behind the technology of VR, it was shocking to me that when they finally made their own headset, that they didn't push the tracking forward and that they relied on that old external model.
Here's the thing. The tracking on the Index is the best that you can get.
I believe
there's no skipping, there's no glitching. If something's weird, it's because your computer's fucked up, not because the tracking's gone bad.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it, but at the same time, my very old, like first gen Windows mixed reality headset that I bought for $199 that has inside out tracking is like 99% totally fine. Like the convenience factor to me offsets any kind of shortcomings in the tracking, like having to mount that stuff in your room. Just
Well, so the places that the inside out tracking breaks down are things like holding up your hands right up to your face to like aim a gun, like to ADS totally. Down a gun, stuff like that.
The old MR headsets. I mean, I guess we're skipping ahead a little bit here,
That's
but
fine.
like those things are especially limited because like the controllers, the field of view for controller tracking is incredibly limited. Like if you basically move the controllers kind of over your shoulder, it doesn't completely lose them because I think it's still got like gyroscope accelerometer data.
It infers, coming
in, but part of the tracking of the controllers is based on the front of the headset being able to see them. So like that is very limited, but even then, like it's not the end of the world. Like it still mostly works.
It's very manageable for games is what I would say.
Yeah.
If you're doing content creation stuff, the extra precision of the Lighthouse sensors versus the inside out hand tracking stuff is good. Like
that I could definitely see. But at that point, you're outfitting a workspace. Like if those are your needs, like you are devoting space to that, and that is fine. But like for just a home office living room kind of situation, like having to mount those sensors is just kind of a lot.
So you can use Oculus. So on the Steam VR stuff, the Cosmos, the Index, the old Vive, the Vive Pro, there's a couple other smaller headsets we don't need to get into. Like smaller, like tiny market size headsets. They work with everything on Steam, obviously. They also work with Oculus native stuff using a third-party tool called Revive, which has always been a little bit janky. It's better than it has been in the past. There's not a ton of first-party Oculus stuff, so mostly you're playing old things at this point, like Echo Arena and the shooting galleries and stuff that they released over the last few years. And it also works with VR games on other stores like Epic, because when you play a VR game that's on the Epic store, it just fires up Steam VR.
That's so weird.
Which is really weird. Yeah.
The overlapping and like piggybacking kind of platforms for VR is the weirdest thing. Cause like I am speaking very mixed reality centrically here because that's what I own, but like that thing does Steam VR. But yeah, like you launch into the mixed reality interface, which is a very Microsoft store looking like modern art museum kind of interface, and then you launch a Steam thing, and then it launches Steam VR inside of that, and then you're in the Steam VR interface. And so from what you're saying, if I were to play Oculus games on this mixed reality headset, I would go MR interface and then the Steam VR interface and then the Oculus interface on top. Like I would literally be stacking like three.
Then Revive, then the Oculus interface.
Okay, so 3.5 basically. Like it's kind of a mess. Like it's a bunch of walled gardens basically, right?
Look, man, you just got to jack into the mixed reality store, and then from there you jack into Steam VR, and then you jack in your soft for the Revive.
Like if you're saying if you're saying the VR is just Inception, I think I'm out.
You can just recall those robots, man. That's what you need to do. That stuff's weird. It works. Like
it works. It's just a little bit. It's very confusing to get used to.
It is
like which interface am I in right now? What do I need to launch first and then second?
Yeah. So the thing I'll say about the Index is I think that those hand controllers are my favorites.
And that's the one. That's the one with the individual finger.
It's the one with individual finger. It's capacitive along the edges of your fingers, and it will model the curl of your finger, even though it's not measuring it directly. It's inferring still from pretty good data, but there's a stick on the top. The stick has had problems over the years. It seems like the newer versions, like the newer revs of the hardware, are better. But on some of the initial ones, if you move the stick all the way to one of the extremes, I think it's the outside extreme, and then try to click the stick, it won't click because you're outside the range of motion. But other than that, they seem pretty reliable. I've whacked the shit out of mine and they still work. Walls, it turns out, are still VR's natural enemy. And when you're playing a game, I mean, Alex obviously was designed with that controller in mind, but it's really cool to you make a grasping motion with your fingers to gravity pull stuff up towards you and then chuck it and have that work well. The Oculus PC side is the Rift S, which is still available. It seems like they're moving away from that. It's unclear. Like They haven't said they're going to end of life it, but it's Facebook, so who knows? They could kill it at any moment. It's probably the best deal in PC VR right now because the older Windows MR headsets are no longer really available. And the Rift S controllers are really good, really reliable. They use normal AA batteries. So like when you run out of battery in a controller, you just pop a new one in, and if you use Loops or something, you're basically wasting nothing.
Sure. But I mean, there have to be Quest only games coming out at this point, right? Like, are you like, if you're buying into a Rift at this point, are you potentially just kind of shutting yourself out of most of their ongoing development?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you buy a Rift at this point, you're committing to buying stuff from Steam pretty much. That headset's $300. Oculus is selling stuff on mobile and PC. Some of it's cross-buy, but most of it isn't. So you have to kind of pay attention and think about where you want to play stuff. I've like, generally speaking, I find the mobile headsets to be pretty underpowered to the point that like worse than the PSVR in some cases. The Quest 2 is more capable, and it seems like they're selling at a really impressive rate. So like the market will probably push toward not supporting the Quest 1 earlier than it would in like a PS4 Pro type situation.
Sure. I mean, at the end of the day, like it's still kind of souped up mobile phone hardware in there, right?
I mean, so the Quest 1 is definitely that. The Quest 2, like they have hardware acceleration for the SLAM tracking, the inside out tracking and all that kind of stuff. So like it takes a lot of that load off of the CPU, which isn't happening on the Quest 1. You can do like the second version of that is a dramatically more capable piece of hardware.
That's fair.
Whether that matters is entirely up to developers deciding whether or not they want to shut out however many people bought. Here's the other thing. Oculus doesn't post sales numbers for any of their hardware. So like, I don't have any idea whether it could be that Oculus has already sold an order of magnitude more Quest 2s than they sold Quest 1s. And nobody cares about the Quest 1 hardware 6 months from now. I don't know. But you can also plug the Quest in, both of the Quests in with a special cable. It's a USB 3 Type-C cable that's $80 and 16 feet long, and that will let you play PC games. It's not particularly comfortable because of where you plug in the USB cable on the Quest 1. On the Quest 2, especially with the Pro Audio strap or the Elite strap, it's much more usable. I haven't really spent substantial time with the Quest 2. But the thing that all the reviewers said is that with the Elite strap, it's very comfortable. You can get a $50 strap that has nothing. It's just a physical, more comfortable strap with, I think, some that replaces the cloth one that it ships with. Or for $130, you can get one with a battery on it too that like counterbalances the front of the headset a little bit and gives you a lot more playtime. And that starts at, I think, $400. I can't remember, but it's like, that's a pretty good, if you just want to get some VR and you want to play some Beat Saber and play some Pistol Whip, and like, you're probably not going to get Medal of Honor on there. You're definitely not going to get Alex on there unless you use the link cable, but you can play Steam VR games if you get the link cable for $80. So
yeah, like that thing acting as just a sort of quote unquote dumb headset that connects to your PC where the PC does the processing. So like it is a real VR headset like these others, in addition to being a standalone. Like that is a huge selling point to me. Like if it didn't have that thing would be a non-starter for someone like me, like, well, if it was limited to only games that could run on the headset, then no, thank you. But since you could hook it up and play Alex on it as well. That's kind of a big deal.
Well, so the thing I'll say is that for every kind of disappointing Quest game I've played, there's a pretty amazing, like the Port of the Room, the VR room game. The room game is, it has issues that are mostly related to it being a straight port of an iPad game.
Yeah.
Like it has weird UI choices and stuff like that I wouldn't do if I was making a VR native game. But it runs really well on Quest. Like that stuff is really good. And like there's no, like I notice a little bit of a frame rate difference playing Beat Saber or Pistol Whip or Space Pirate Trainer on Quest versus Steam. But it's that experience is fabulous.
Totally. I'm not saying the Quest native stuff is bad or anything. It's just that there are always going to be things like Alex that will just be PC only, and having the option to also play those on the Quest is a pretty big selling point.
Exactly. The interesting thing is, my bet is that the PSVR stuff probably ports pretty straight to Quest.
Sure. I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see what else.
Windows MR. Mixed reality, which I'm sort of shocked still exists, but here we are.
Look, they just so most of the first gen headsets are no longer available.
Yeah. I got in when there was a fire sale. So this is why I'm so shocked that it's still around, is that there was a fire sale on them, basically. Yeah. Like, I think those things came out at sort of standard VR prices of like $400, $500, $600. And then all of a sudden one day I saw people going like, hey, the Lenovo Explorer is $199 right now. And I'm like, hey, that's a pretty decent price to check out some VR. Sure, I'll give that a shot. So like, it was, what is it? Lenovo, HP, Samsung. There were like 6 different companies making MR headsets.
Dell, I think, made one.
Dell made one, yes. A couple others.
It's all kind of the normal Microsoft OEM right, partners.
Totally. And they kind of all just went on deep sale and then ceased to exist. So I was like, well, this platform is probably going away soon, but for that
They're still releasing updates for the Portal.
Right. So that's the thing. Like I think from what I can tell, I think they tend to come with the kind of Windows feature updates, your 20H4 or whatever they're calling the semi-annual updates. But yeah, they still like support the platform aspect of it.
Yeah. So HP just released the Reverb 2 at the end of last year.
Yeah. So that really surprised me to see a new MR headset come out.
Well, so it's interesting because it seems like kind of a partnership. Valve makes the lenses and speakers for it. So it uses the planar speakers from the Index and the Fresnel lenses that they use on the Index. Norm really liked it. I haven't actually used it. Like, normally when new headsets come out, I go over to the tested officer to Norm's house and try stuff out. And for obvious reasons, that hasn't happened in the last 10 months. But he seemed to really like it in his review. The reviews are pretty good. The controllers have always kind of been the weak spot of the Windows MR stuff.
Yeah, they're okay.
Samsung made really good Windows MR controllers, and everybody else shipped the default Microsoft ones, it seems like.
Yeah.
They're fine. Like, they're very workable. They do have tracking problems when you get them up super close. So if you want to play like an Arma Onward or Pascal or Pavlov, you might not have a great time with that.
Yeah.
But they're really high resolution. It's 2160 by 2160 per eye. And if you plug that into a PC that can actually drive that, then it looks good. Like, the screen door stuff is gone.
I bet that looks pretty good.
Yeah, you can read text, all of the things. Like, you can use normal ass Windows. Like, when I fire up the Windows preview, desktop preview on my Index, it just looks like a normal ass Windows desktop on a big giant monitor, 8 feet in front of me.
That sounds awesome. I mean, the thing I find with VR though is that you kind of don't know what you're missing. Like,
what do you mean?
Like, I mean, I've played a decent amount of Alex on that first gen Explorer, and it was fine. Like,
oh yeah,
that's what I mean. Like, if I were to play it side by side with this new, the Reverb 2 or like the Index or something, like, I'm sure it would be a world of difference to side by side them. But only having that Explorer in here, like, yes, the field of view is a little more limited and like the resolution is slightly lower and the controllers are not amazing, but like, especially for $100 or $199, like, it's fine. So it does the job.
In my experience, when you put on the headset, unless there's something wrong with the game, you usually stop noticing the VR after. Yeah. If you don't stop noticing the VR after a few minutes, probably it's not a very good game.
Right. Your brain kind of tunes out the shortcomings of the individual headset you're using if you don't have a frame of reference, I guess is what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The Reverb is eternally out of stock since they released it. As every new exciting piece of consumer electronics that came out in 2020 is.
Yeah, like some of the retailers I checked for this still listed as a pre-order, so it's very soft launch, paper launch. I mean, reviews only came out, I think, 3 weeks ago.
December, yeah,
or something like that. Yeah.
If you release something and it's not available to purchase, is it out, Brad?
Does it make a sound?
Like, I'm still like, I haven't seen a PS5 in the wild yet.
No.
So yeah, and that works with Steam. You can use Revive with it as well. I haven't actually tried that, but apparently people do that. It seems like one layer too many, but I don't know.
Yeah.
My recommendation is if something's available on Steam, you should probably buy it on Steam. So that way that Steam seems to be the platform for VR. Because that's where everything ends up.
Yes.
And then there's also weird things like I think the games that come out on Game Pass that use the different APIs, the WMR stuff. What are the apps called? The ones that you can't access. UWP. Yeah. Seems to be issues getting those working with Steam VR because like Tetris Effect came out on Game Pass last year with all that new multiplayer stuff, and VR doesn't work on that version.
Yikes.
That said, Flight Sim seems to work, so I don't know. I don't know what the story is. It could just be a developer choice.
So yeah, I guess that's kind of it for like the nitty gritty. Like, how do you feel overall about? Or is there one more thing you want to touch on?
Yeah, the lens inserts. So this is something that's kind of new. Oculus is supporting it directly with the Quest, where you can go you can go to Frames Direct, I think, and buy these.
That's crazy!
Buy lens inserts that just snap into the headset, so you don't have to wear glasses inside it.
As somebody who mostly has played VR with glasses on, this is very appealing.
Yeah, it's super good. There's also third parties that you can buy them for most other headsets, all the way back to like the original Rift.
Oh, that's cool.
That usually involves like faxing your prescription to China and. Good luck, like sometimes taking a couple of tries at the lenses before you get them exactly right.
Sure.
But I know multiple people who've done that and have had good results. So
at the same time as someone whose prescription seems to be changing, I seem to be ahead of the curve on needing progressive lenses. I don't know if do you have progressive?
No.
I found recently that I was like, how come when I hold my Kindle up close to my face in bed when I'm trying to read at night, I can't focus on the letters anymore? What is going on?
That's bad.
It's bad. Yes, my eye doctor said, hey, you're a little young for this, but here you are. So like, anyway, I mean, most people's prescriptions don't change in adulthood really, but like jumping through all those hoops and then having those lenses or those inserts suddenly no longer be useful would be kind of a bummer.
Well, so the inserts aren't super okay. My perception on what glasses should cost is weird because I have a really complicated prescription that's expensive. Like I don't think I've ever bought a pair of glasses that was less than like $300 for the lenses. So the inserts are $80 for the Quest. The ones that my friend of mine got for his Vive or for his Index, I can't remember which one, were significantly less than that. Like the China ones are
that's not bad.
Like $10 a lens or something sometimes.
Okay, that's not so bad.
Yeah, like you can take some chances with that, I think. I don't know if they have those for the Windows MR headsets. I do know that they have them for the Vive, the Index, the original Oculus, the Rift S, and the Quest.
That is cool.
And you can 3D print frames for those two if you have a 3D printer.
Sure.
So yeah, that's kind of it. Like,
yeah. How do you feel about the state of the VR market? My gut feeling is that I don't feel especially bullish about where it's at, but
I mean, look, the last year has been really bad for my company because we make cartoons in front of live studio audiences.
Yeah, that's rough.
Speaking of, stuff's happening on the Foo front, but just in case, I'm starting to look for work. So if anybody has anything they think I'd be interested in, hey, shoot me a message. I'm available for both consulting and maybe full-time. I don't know. I've specifically helped some brands and charities with their Twitch strategy, and I would love to talk to your company about ways to use podcasts to communicate internally or externally what you're working on and why that stuff is cool. It feels a little bit like we're kind of in a holding pattern waiting for AR.
Okay.
Like it feels like a lot of the VR stuff maybe. I don't look. I want to be careful because like there's been incredible work done in VR, both in terms of games and apps and other stuff. Like there's really, really neat stuff. But on a larger level, I don't think anybody ever thought VR was going to like replace screens as an interface as your main interface for computers. I think people think that that's still the case for AR.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely Definitely the Magic Leap pitch.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm convinced. Like Magic Leap, things haven't gone super great for Magic Leap.
Yeah. I don't know what they were thinking getting out there using the grandiose language that they were. Like that. When has that ever paid off for any startup in history?
I mean, look, they knew that they needed to raise a buttload of money, and if you don't have grandiose language, you're not going to raise billions of dollars.
Well, to your investors, sure, but in public, well, maybe, to be fair, I guess a lot of the like, hey, this is the future of everything talk was kind of coming out organically, not necessarily. They weren't exactly putting out press releases saying like, hey, this is going to be the only interface for computers going forward or anything like that.
The NDAs that they made people sign before they did the demos of Magic Leap before it was public were like anyway. They actively tried to keep that shit down.
Okay, that's fair. And I guess in fairness to them, that's not necessarily their fault. But like people we knew who had gotten those demos were coming out of those things going like, yo, this shit is fucking mind blowing.
I'm going to go and tell you, it still is amazing. Like it's still some of the best like tech demos I've ever seen. The multiplayer game that they had at GDC a couple of years ago, where you were kind of like ducking around objects in the real world and shooting virtual people and overlaying virtual characters on top of other human characters. Still amazing. Like it is amazing technology. I think we're starting to see hints that glasses are going to be smaller. Like we've seen some prototype / patent application drawings and stuff like that indicate a chunky frame, but not like a goggle type situation. My understanding is that there are thousands of people working at most of the big 5 FANG companies in the Valley, working on AR at this point. I don't know about Facebook, but I know Apple has a massive team of people working on this. I know Google has a massive team of people working on this. And I suppose I assume Microsoft does as well. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with Amazon or some of the other stuff. I mean, look, it's the idea of being able to chuck a window anywhere you want it seems pretty compelling.
Sure.
Like, I don't know if that's actually going to work in practice, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And the one thing that has happened is the hand tracking. We didn't talk about this at all on the Quest, but the hand tracking on Quest, even though people aren't really using it in games, is working really well these days. So like those SLAM cameras give you the ability to track hands and fingers pretty reliably, then that solves kind of one of the big problems of early AR stuff, which is that you need a weird controller to make it work.
Wait, you're talking just your organic fingers and hands? Like you're not talking about like wearing a glove or anything that assists in tracking, like literally just your wow.
Yeah. It is not fidelity of like 4-finger tracking, but like you do gestures and stuff like that, and you can control the UI and open and close stuff and things like that. That's
crazy. I did not know it was that good.
Yeah, that's
very cool. I
would say it's up and down, but when it's good, it's surprisingly good.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I feel like when in 10 years, when we look back on this and we're doing hey, remember old VR stuff, it's going to be that VR was the dev kit for AR, probably.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, so that leads me to my kind of final question here. When you are talking about AR supplanting VR, is AR going to get to the point where, like, to me, this sounds trivial, but I'm sure the actual technical execution is way harder. But is AR going to get to the point where it can kind of de facto act as VR by just sort of like blanking out or drawing over the entire field of view in the lenses and just not letting you see your surroundings? Does that make sense? Like kind of letting you inhabit an entirely virtual space by just sort of obscuring your, bless you.
Sorry.
Does that make sense? What I'm describing?
Yeah, no, I think look, VR is a subset of AR, right?
Right. Okay.
I think that probably it won't be happening on the screen. I think that'll happen on like a physical, like you'll flip the blast shield down, right?
Oh, I guess that would be a lot easier than just having because you would need a field of view that could fully obscure your range of vision, which would probably be asking a lot, right?
Well, and it also depends on it depends on the hardware. Like one of the interesting things about AR is that the hardware for drawing the stuff that's in the world can be a little bit less potent, because like if you're not drawing the room, like the frame rate of your room is real good in AR, right? It's the things that you're drawing on top of the room.
What's the it's the old NVIDIA tech demo thing, right? Of like, this tech demo looks for this new graphics card looks amazing because 100% of the compute power is going into this one character model.
Right. But with VR, the floor of what you can do is this going to run at a frame rate that doesn't make my users sick? Right. 95% of my users sick.
Right.
And that's less of a problem in AR, because if the characters that you're drawing on top of the real world are running at 60 frames a second instead of 120 frames a second, it's not going to make you sick. It's just going to look a little janky. And you can art design your way around that in a lot of cases. Right.
But you lose the ability to do these kind of whole world, like transportive experiences where you actually feel like you're in another place unless you can render that whole room.
Well, so the other side of that is that in the 5 years since the first VR headsets have come out, the amount of computing power that we can put in one of those headsets has gone up a couple of orders of magnitude, probably.
Sure.
Right.
Yes, like, especially like once Apple jumps into this space with the way that their mobile hardware performs, increases in performance year over year, like that's going to be pretty wild.
Well, yeah. And the fact that we're accelerating the CPU computationally expensive stuff now. So like the 3D audio, the SLAM computations that tell where the headset is in 3D space from camera feeds, the machine vision stuff, all of that has a lot of that has hardware acceleration at this point. You mentioned Apple. There was a rumor that landed last week or the week before that Bloomberg posted that said that Apple's going to announce a VR headset this year that's going to be incredibly expensive, and that they expect to sell no more than one per day at stores.
What?
Wow. Like so expensive that they only sell one per day at stores. I did some math, some back of the napkin math.
Yeah.
They have a few hundred stores.
Okay.
If they sold one per day per store for a year, they would sell a few 100,000 units, which to me sounds like a really good dev kit launch.
Yeah. Yeah. That's for something expensive and kind of not quite ready. That sounds fine.
Well, and if you're thinking about, like how they rolled out the M1 Max to developers so that they can port their apps and stuff over.
That seems very un-Apple like. I mean, Apple's a different company now, but like, in the Jobs era, to me, like the Apple strategy was like, let's wait until this tech is really there. Like, we're not going to be the first ones out there with a touchscreen phone. We're going to wait until we can bring it together in a way that it becomes the definitive touchscreen phone. So to hear that they're doing some kind of weird, like soft tech demo launch of this technology instead of like kind of being the definitive one is a little weird.
My assumption is that they're looking at app ecosystem. Like when Jobs launched the iPhone, they said, hey, look, you don't need apps. You're just going to do everything on the web. This is a web phone.
He was a little set in his ways in some capacities.
Well, but that was also a convenient fiction because they didn't have an app ecosystem because they didn't want to tell developers about the phone in advance.
Sure.
So I don't think they can launch in an established market. Yeah, they were essentially establishing a market when they did that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
With VR, they're coming in and competing against Facebook and Microsoft and Valve, and you can't or AR, you can't launch it. If you launch an AR headset without apps, not having early VR apps is one of the things that actually probably hurt VR as much as not being able to make enough hardware. And I think that they don't. Look, the benefit of owning AR for consumers is that they are the Microsoft for the next phase of computing.
Sure.
They are to next phase of computing as Microsoft was to GUIs in 1995 to 2015.
Yeah.
So, I think that they're not going to take any chances. And if that means that they don't have a big surprise reveal on the stage, the surprise is going to be, hey, these look like normal glasses, not, hey, we're making an AR headset.
Sure.
So anyway, but I think the VR thing is going to be dev kit. I don't think normal people, I don't think that's a thing for normal people.
Yeah, I'm sitting here skimming this story, trying to see if there's anything unusual expected about it. Or
also, Bloomberg is notoriously bad for Apple rumors. They were the ones that pushing the Apple television and
the Apple car.
Apple car. Yeah.
Okay.
They weren't the only ones pushing that, but they were among the proponents.
Okay. So maybe grain of salt.
Dude, I judging by the number of people I see going to work from VR stuff that now work at Apple, just hit my LinkedIn, I would be shocked if there are not thousands of people working on AR at Apple right now.
Something has to be happening. I mean, they acquired a VR company a couple of years ago, according to this.
They acquire all sorts of people, but
yes.
It's
virtual reality. It's virtually ready for prime time. That's bad. That's all I could come up with.
I still, the stuff I play the most is like I play Pistol Whip and Beat Saber every week, pretty much, right? Like I do that when I can't leave the house because of weather, because people walking around without masks and stuff like that. I don't know if I'd still be doing that if we weren't quarantining.
Yeah, but it's a good way to move around, right?
It's a good way to move around. Like my kid loves playing Vacation Simulator and Job Simulator and like stuff like Down the Rabbit Hole and those kind of small adventure games that don't exactly exist on PC or console. But it is, do not expect a large number of Alex-like games. And if they are, expect them to be more like the Medal of Honor game that is like a really scope limited thing and not like a big long 10-hour, Alex is essentially on rails too, but like don't expect a big long experience where you're following a linear path and having an adventure. VR.
Yeah.
Should we thank our patrons?
I feel like my expectations are managed. Sure.
I mean,
that's what we do around here, right? We just manage people's expectations.
Well, hold on. But the other thing is, it's not fair to talk about this. Alex is in everybody. If you like games, you should play Alex.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Like there's a sequence in Alex. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm not going to, but I put it in my game of the year right up at Giant Bomb about there's this creature named Jeff who is maybe the most, like, I don't like horror games. It's the most effective non-horror game implementation of a character. Like it is the best design sequence I think I've ever seen in a game like this.
That's cool.
And it works because of VR in a way that it wouldn't work on a 2D screen.
Sure.
So,
yeah, I mean, that kind of that goes both ways, right? Like, it's on the one hand, it's amazing that VR is capable of doing things like that. On the other hand, Alex is kind of an outlier of coming from a company with functionally infinite resources, willing to throw a bunch of those resources at weird projects like that and stretch the limits. But not everybody is going to be able. In fact, just about nobody else is going to be able to do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Gabe do that interview, and he's like, "Look, Alex sold really well for us. We're going to keep making more VR stuff."
Oh, okay, so that's cool.
And then he also talked about brain-computer interfaces for a very long time.
Of course.
Which seemed like, we talked about that when Elon Musk rolled his thing out a few months ago. But
yeah,
the people I know that work in that space, like human vision interface and stuff like that, are incredibly skeptical of anything that interfaces directly with your brain in any kind of meaningful way.
Look, all I'm going to say is that once we reach the eventuality where we all have to pledge fealty to our techno-feudal overlord of choice,
yeah,
I will take Gabe over Elon Musk any day.
Oh yeah, I'd take Gabe over all of them probably. The thing that people tell me, we talked about this on This Is Only a Test this week a little bit, but the thing that the people who work in that space tell me is that there's not, well, there's some real material science stuff. Like when you put electrodes in people's brains, they get plaque buildup on them that makes them stop working after a really short period of time. Boy. So they're like limited use only.
Okay.
The other side of that is like from moving from computers to phones to VR, there were these massive markets along the way that fostered development of technologies that were really required for the later things. So like, the iPod begat the iPhone because they started putting color LCD screens on to bring the price of those screens down. And they started making flash iPods to bring the cost of flash down. And all of a sudden an 8 gigabyte iPhone was possible because the price of flash and the price of LCD screens got to a point that they could sell it for $600. And then the phones, generated, inertial measurement units, accelerometers, gyroscopes, compasses all on one chip, and cameras and screens, and all of those things went into VR headsets, and those made VR headsets cheap. And there's not a clear like product to product path to get to why, 1 billion people using direct neural interfaces. But Gabe's very smart. So maybe we're just dumbasses. I don't know.
That's right.
Should we talk about patrons?
Yeah.
If you would like to support the pod, you can by going to patreon.com/techpod. We for $2 a month, you get access to the Patreon, the TechPod Discord, which is full of just beautiful nerds that are talking about the things that they're into. It's the conversation's all over the place on a day to day. There are something like 25 or 30 channels now that range between like, indoor, outdoor activities, parenting, like getting work advice from people who are doing different stuff than you.
Yeah. Home ownership, audio, video production, coding, just the works.
Mechanical keyboard nerds. Like we have everything. We have it all. And if there's not a channel and there's interest, we'll make it. Again, you can go to patreon.com/techpod.
There you go.
I think I'd done this 75 times. And sign up there. And then we also do a patron exclusive episode each month. There's another episode back in that backlog with Doug. So if you enjoyed last week's episode with Doug, you can go back and listen to that.
Seems like a lot of people enjoyed that last week's episode with Doug.
We got to find more nerds.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'll do it for us. This is our last episode of the month, so we have to thank a bunch of patrons.
Yes.
As always, thank you to our executive producer level patrons, the Bunny Fiend, Jacob Chappell, David Allen, and James Kamek. But also, I would like to thank our associate producer level patrons, Cedric Kozenmacher, Andre Burke, Brian Rabe, Sean Talon, Tom Hilton, Jacob Wilson, Terry Cox, Arthur Geese, Ben Gulmy, Dave Ulian, Dan Brockman, Jad Rita, still a Star Wars name. I love it. Thomas Shea, and Graham Banks. Thank you all so much for your support. And thanks to everybody on the Patreon.
Quite literally make all this possible. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, you all are rad. And just as a reminder, if I know a lot of people don't like monthly charges, especially since Patreon is kind of bad about the way they charge. There's always problems with it.
Yeah.
You can sign up for an annual now, and you get a little bit of a discount if you do an annual. And you back at any of the annual tiers. So I guess that'll do it for us this week, Brad.
Yes.
See you all.
I'm waiting with bated breath for your outro. What do you got?
Look, I have to finish this because if I don't, then the way it edits doesn't work right.
Hey, look, if Audacity wants to change the way that audio ducking works so that I don't have to put your track right under the music to make it duck right, then I can send the show off one of these days. But until then, will you have the floor?
We'll see you all next week.